A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, semicolon. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is the text of the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights. And I would say that it's not all that uncommon to find people who either misunderstand those words or misconstrue those words to mean things. So if we look at the text of this, the first clause of this statement, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, is a preparatory clause. It's a build-up to the thing that they're about to say, as in it is the impetus for what they're about to say. And because of this thing, we have to have people armed, essentially, is what that text means. Now, you will have people that see the term well-regulated in the Second Amendment, and they will construe that to mean that we need rigorous regulation imposed on arms movements throughout the United States, and that could not be any farther from the truth. In fact, if you look at the writings of the founders, there was a huge argument between the factions on whether they were going to include the Bill of Rights at all, because they were really concerned about enumerating individual rights and saying that y'all have all your rights and just outlining what the government can do. They were concerned by only enumerating certain ones of those rights, that's all we would have left. And then the other side of the argument was, hey, if you don't outline these, then they'll take everything. And, well, we can see where that kind of fell. If you look at the term well-regulated, as it was used in common use at the time that the Constitution was written, it means to be in good working order. Now that I've given us a little bit of context with that little primer, the purpose of today's video is to discuss some of the proposed legislation that is currently in the House that could move to a vote as soon as this week. And I wanted to discuss kind of how we gotten here, and then what that legislation proposes. The two bills in question are H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446. I've read the complete text of both these bills as they currently stand, and I'll just give you my straight take on them. These are pretty stupid bills. Just got to be honest. The people who are writing these bills clearly do not understand the constitutional basis by which arms regulation happens inside the United States. It is done under the guise of the Commerce Clause. That is the constitutional basis by which arms regulation happens inside the United States. That's how the ATF was founded, and that is the mechanism by which they impose regulations on the industry. To be able to engage in the business, the commercial activity of selling firearms and the like inside of the United States, you have to hold a federal firearms license of some persuasion. As someone who holds a federal firearms license, it subjects you to different rules and regulations dealing with the commercial activity of moving guns around. All those regulations like background checks and record keeping are administrative tools that the ATF uses to keep businesses in check. And because of that, in order to stay licensed and stay in business, they force FFL holders to do stuff to you. Regulating business is completely different than regulating individuals. And we saw this whole thing with the mask mandate type thing. It's completely unconstitutional to force an individual to wear a mask. However, they can impose regulations on business to get people to do things, or they'll shut the business down. So we saw that used to great effect. It's the exact same thing. There's a big difference between regulating business and determining what you can do with your individually owned, lawfully purchased property, which is what the bills that are currently in the House of Representatives seeks to do. That's why we don't have regulations on individual transfers at the federal level, which is what is commonly referred to as the gun show loophole. That is not a thing. It does not exist. It's not a real thing. That's some term that somebody made up. When you go to a gun show and there are businesses there selling firearms, they have to conduct a background check on you. It's illegal as a business to do that. Like, you have to follow those regulations regardless. Now, there is no regulation that stands in the way of an individual purchasing a product and then transferring it to someone else lawfully. Unless, of course, they have a reason to believe that that person is going to use it for ill intent, or they are a felon or something like that. If you have a reasonable suspicion that those people that you're trying to move that property to are not able to lawfully possess it, it is already illegal to conduct that transfer. Before we move on to the actual bills, keep in mind that already, anytime a firearm crosses state lines, it is subject to interstate commerce regulations. So, I can't use myself because I'm a federal firearms licensee, so that doesn't actually work. But say my brother, for instance, wants to sell a firearm to a friend in another state. He currently lives in Iowa. Say he wants to sell it to my neighbor or something like that. If he ships it here, he cannot ship it to that person's door. Even if the transaction, the financial transaction, has already occurred, he has to ship it to a federal firearms licensee anytime it crosses state lines. However, it is legal that if he wants to do the legwork himself and he wants to transport the firearm himself and conduct the transaction that way, that is legal. To the actual regulations here. HR 8. If you boil down HR 8, it wants to make that whole thing not possible anymore. They want to get rid of that sort of thing, and they also are trying to basically, if you really boil it down, get rid of places like gun broker and arms list. This is a firearms transaction record, also known as a 4473. And basically, this is the paperwork that you fill out when you go to buy a firearm commercially from a dealer. And it's got a couple different sections on it. It's pretty straightforward. As someone who has done this, the background check system, you enter your information into this, and then I take this information and I punch it into the National Instant Check System that was established in 1998. Remember that background checks on firearms have only been going on since 1993 in the United States. So the entire history of the United States up until the early 90s, we didn't do any of this sort of stuff. So, digression there, a little bit of history for you. But I take this information and I punch it into the National Instant Check System at the FBI, and it tells me whether or not you've got any problems or not. Alongside this, the sister piece of record keeping that pairs with this is the Acquisition Disposition Book. So it looks something like this: in, acquisition, and disposition. So whenever a firearm comes in, it gets logged into this book, and whenever it goes out, it gets logged out of this book. And alongside that, we have up here in the corner, you can see that there's a section for the internal control number of which transaction this occurred. Basically, that pairs with that book and they talk to each other. And that's how that works. So whenever you purchase a firearm from a business, they have to use that stuff. They have to document where it came from and where it went. And as far as where it went, because there's not enough room on that little line that they gave you, this is where it went. Okay, so that's, and all those records have to be maintained for 20 years. And now, that information, what do I actually punch into NICS? NICS is simply your information so that they conduct the background check. I don't put any information in there. There is not a space to put any information about which guns that you are going after. The serial numbers, the make, model, any of that stuff, none of that information is recorded anywhere but in that AD book and on the front of this form. That information, again, must be maintained for 20 years. And the only way the ATF can get at that information are by two mechanisms. One, they have the right of entry every 12 months for compliance inspections. So in my case, they don't come every 12 months. They come, I had my first compliance inspection just a few days ago. It went well, but it was the first time I've had my license for 3 years. They don't have to come in every 12 months to inspect you. They finally did come and inspect the other day. And again, it went fine. They have access to the records at that point in time. When they do that official inspection, they come check it. They don't necessarily have to have your permission to be there. they have the right to come into the business and take a look at it. That's part of the rules and regulations of having the licensure. The second way that they get at this information is if they have a subpoena or if they have a warrant for that information. Other than that, this information is sequestered at the business on purpose. There's a reason it's done that way. This is not public record. You cannot get any of this information via FOIA or anything like that. All of this is maintained at the business level, and it's a confidential thing on purpose. So, and all that stuff that they want to talk about doing, about making various records public knowledge, well, that's some really scary stuff. Anyway, that is the process that H.R. 8 wants to impose whenever property is moved from one entity to another. So there is no longer Jimmy wants to sell Joey a rifle, a hunting rifle or something like that. They can't just change the money hands and then change the gun hands. They'd have to come into a business and do this whole process between them. This is currently optional. You can do this. Like, if you want to do it that way, you absolutely can, especially if you want to have a record that you move that firearm around. Absolutely. Although record, there is, again, no registration of this, and there should not be registration of this sort of stuff. That is a dangerous thing for several reasons that we're not going to get into in this video. It's just a common sense thing. We want to talk about common sense gun regulations. Common sense regulations is to not have registries. They're historically very dangerous, and they can create some new age problems in the age of technology that we just really shouldn't even be playing with. HR 1446. And I look at these as kind of like bills in tandem, because if you've got HR 8, then 1446 is way worse after you've had HR 8. And let me explain. Because you've made it impossible, so all the transactions, you've basically quadrupled, if not tenfold, the transactions that have to be processed at the FFL level. Now you've clogged the system even more. The system is already overloaded. It already can't handle the bandwidth. Okay, it was never built to be able to operate at the level that it's currently operating at. And while it does pretty good, it's I'm not trying to be mean to the guy that created the system or anything, or the people that maintain it, but it's kind of janky, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it doesn't even work with Google Chrome. It's absolutely ridiculous. Or Firefox. Anyway, I'm not gonna complain about my day-to-day. I'm not going to do it. It's not what I set out to do today. Basically, 1446 is an act to clog up the process when you go to purchase a firearm, is what it boils down to. So we've got basically HR 8 mandates what you're allowed to do with your personal property that you lawfully own, and then 1446 makes it harder for you to do so, is really what it comes down to. Now, I mentioned why this is something that perhaps a lot of people haven't thought about this way. Again, going back to the Commerce Clause, it can be argued that there is a constitutional basis by which the Congress can institute regulations through an executive agency to impose regulations on businesses that then have to impose business practices on you. Okay, that's a roundabout way of saying that there could be a constitutional basis by which you can argue that businesses have to play by the government's rules. There is not a constitutional basis for which the government can determine who is allowed to exercise their rights and who is not. And invading your privacy to do so is absolutely unconstitutional. And if you are a major gun control advocate and you are seeing this video, I don't know how you made it here, first of all, but second of all, I would say you're playing with fire. And what I mean by getting burned on this is if you continue to push this way, there's a pretty good chance that somebody is going to sue over it. And it would not surprise me if that went to the Supreme Court and they determined that background checks in totality are a violation of the Constitution of the United States when it comes to exercising your Second Amendment rights. So, if you're a proponent of background checks in general, you really should just quit while you're ahead. Pushing it to the next level and really churning down on the American people, especially in a time when we have more regulations on our day-to-day lives imposed on us than ever before. It's just really not a good look. Guys and gals, I've had enough of this topic today. There's no sponsor for today's video. And to be honest, I don't know if you guys have been following social media, but I totally broke my hand. And if you guys got any ideas for funny videos to do with Kurt with a broken hand, then sound off in the comment section down below. But basically, the purpose of today's video was to bring into focus this type of things that they're trying to do, the basis by which these sort of things occur on a day-to-day basis, and then also let you guys know that some of these bills have support in Congress, and it is your job as a citizen of the United States to keep your republic by being politically active. So get in contact with your representatives, let them know what you think about this sort of stuff, whether you like them or not. Remember, government officials are not your friend. It's not their job to be your friend.